Hello, this is Harry Paden. I'm the host of the Irvington Now Show. Today I have as my guest Mr. Craig Garner, and we will go over some very interesting things surrounding Mr. Garner, and we will, just talk. And he's a longtime friend, a person that many of you may recognize because he's a Irvingtonian who has been in the town as long as I've been in the town, I know, and we'll go into some of that background. So, as I sometimes forget in the beginning to say, call a friend, call a neighbor, let them know that the Irvington Now Show is on, and I hope and I'm sure you'll find it a very interesting episode. Mr. Garner, thanks for being a guest.
It's my pleasure, Harry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Garner, can you give our audience some background information on yourself?
Sure, but before I do, what I'd like to first do is publicly congratulate you for having this show. As a long-time activist in this show and this town, and knowing you for so long, I think it's long overdue for you to have an opportunity like this, and to have someone with your depth of knowledge and writing capability is an excellent appointment for you, so I congratulate you.
Thank you very much, and I always give all credit to the Honorable Mayor Tony Voss, because it wasn't even that I said, well, Mayor, I want a show. He came to me and said, Paden. So, as you said, I guess he saw that it was something that I love to do, and I thank you, because I know, those who know Mr. Garner doesn't fluff things. So, I take that as a very, I'm going to keep that tape, because I can take that to court, because Mr. Garner does not say something that's not true. So, thank you, sir.
Right. In terms of my background, I've been married 36 years, I have 2 children, Michelle, Tamira. I've been living in this town for 33 years. In terms of my work background, I'm actually a systems analyst. I'm retired now, but I worked at AT&T for 24 years, and then they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse and had to move on. And then I worked for Jersey City Public Schools for 10 years, and I just retired from there. So I'm retired now, but I'm still actively pursuing my passion, which is writing poetry, which I started back in 1988 or so, and I'll get into that later. As far as hobbies, I collect African art. I love football, basketball, I love sports, and I just like listening to jazz and being involved in my community, such that I can give something back to the youth.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. And that's a very interesting background. Again, as I said, I know as long as I've been in Irvington, and that's more than 20 years, and you've surpassed me by, another decade, 10 years, another 10 years or so. So you've been here for certainly a long time. And again, as long as I've known you, you've been involved, your wife has been involved, and your marriage certainly has stood the test of time, because those of us, I'm divorced now, we don't stay together like people used to. The minute you didn't cut your fingernails right, I'm sorry, I'm going to divorce you. So I applaud you. The other thing, this man has a lot of accolades, and I'm going to go into the one that specifically while we're here. There's only one fault I find with this man. He's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and they just beat us, so I'm not going to hold that against him. They did beat us, yeah. So I'm a little burnt about that, but I love this man. Mr. Garner, you already mentioned how long you've resided in Irvington. In reviewing your background and involvement, I got exhausted just reading that. Can you share some of your past and current involvements with our audience?
Right, surely. Well, first I have to give all praises due to the man above, God, for blessing me to live my life, live this wonderful life. I started off going to school. I was in the Air Force. I got the Air Force, and I worked a couple of jobs, realized I needed to go to college if I wanted to get a job, some substance where they couldn't just fire you for anything. So I went to school for computer science, and never looked back. I got a job at Dun & Bradstreet, went on to Bell Labs, AT&T, and stayed there, like I said, for 24 years. But while I was at Bell Labs, I met a young man who was going to this organization called the First World Alliance in Harlem, saying that he invited me to come to hear about our history. And I went, it was in Harlem, I went there, and that really opened my eyes about my own history. I didn't know that when I went to school, I was a good student and everything, but I didn't even think about the fact that I never really learned our history as African Americans. So I went to the First World Alliance and found myself at the seat of some of the greatest historians in the world, with Dr. Ben Yakinen, Dr. Jeffries, Dr. Clark, Dr. Van Sertima. I could go on and on. And these guys, these gentlemen, they would give talks, and they would sell tapes, and they would give you books to reference, and they just expanded and blew my mind. And I was like, oh my God. So I wanted a way to share this with other people. And so I started a Black History Club. To make a long story short, I started a Black History Club in AT&T and started bringing those speakers down there, Gil Noble, Dr. Jeffries, Dr. Gunther. Oh, by the way, after I graduated from Essex County College, which I graduated from Essex County and King, I went back there to take a Black History course with Dr. Gunther, who's a dear friend of mine. And I brought him down to AT&T, and I wanted to share this knowledge. I didn't want to just keep this knowledge for me. And what I found out is that a lot of our people weren't prepared for the depth and scope of that knowledge. They would look at you like you were some kind of rebellious activist for wanting to bring this information to the fore. And I was like, you know, what's the problem? I guess it was too much for some people. But then once I went to Rutgers to give a talk about technology, and I needed an icebreaker, so I just decided to write a little poem. And I wrote a poem and called "What Are You Gonna Do?" And it was about when you get out of school, what are you gonna do? Or if you don't get your proper education, what are you gonna do in life? And everybody, it was received very well. Instead of them receiving the technology part, all they remember was the poem. So I said, the poem must be pretty good.
Right.
As a matter of fact, one of the ladies in there was a teacher. She said, send me a copy of that. So I said, oh my God, maybe I got something here. Long story short, I'm a big fan of Paul Robeson and Marcus Garvey. Paul Robeson showed me that you can do more than one thing well. So I said, oh, well, I don't just have to be a tech guy. Maybe I could be a poetry guy too. Marcus Garvey, I found out, had written poetry. And then I started studying poets. Then I read Langston Hughes, and Langston Hughes was writing poetry, but he was using his poetry to share our history.
Yes.
And Gwendolyn Brooks was doing the same thing.
Yes.
So I said, oh, wait a minute now. I can write poetry to enlighten our people. I can write poetry to be a warrior, to be a revolutionary about what we need. And what we need, I was so angry that I didn't learn my history in school, that we need to have a way for others to learn our history. So I said, well, that's what I want to do. I'm going to write poetry. So in a way, it's entertaining, but I'm sharing our knowledge. So I don't want to beat you over the head with all these false history. Because to be honest, I didn't think that our folks, the majority of our people, would read all the books I read. I read so many books, listened to so many tapes, it was overwhelming me.
Right.
So I said, well, I can't try to do that to nobody else, because I tried to do it to my daughters, and they was like, please don't come with that stuff. Please don't come with that no more. I was like, it's your history.
Right.
But I had to realize it's too much. It's too much for some people. And so I said, okay, let me start writing, let me write some books. And in the books, I'll share quotes in there from some of these scholars, and that way they get the information, but they also get entertained. The Asa Hilliards, Wade Nobles, Dr. Naeem Akbar, one of my favorites. So I would put quotes in my books in the middle of the poetry. So although you're being entertained, you're being educated, whether you want it or not. So I said, well, that's going to work. And I tried it with my first book, which I think you might have told me you saw in Montclair somewhere. and people gravitated to it. My wife, all my wife's friends start saying they start asking me, when's your next book? After I did my first book, I don't know if I brought the first book, but once I wrote the first book, I said, you know, a poetic twist of fate.
Right.
And people gravitated. Then they started inviting me to read at functions and stuff. And so I said, well, this is not a bad gig. And I said, well, I never thought I'd be at Bell Labs that long. I always figured that they would eventually get rid of me because I never was the type of guy that, you know, I wasn't team player.
Right.
I would do my job, but I would also try to add something to that in a way that was what they would say in First World is Afrocentric way of doing it. I wouldn't do it just the way you said do it. I would do it the way that I thought it should be done, and not just for me, but for everybody. Right. So I always thought they'd let me go at one point in time. You know, I lasted 25 years somehow. But
you had that technical skill where they could tolerate the other stuff.
Right,
they say, well, this man here knows the stuff.
Never got promoted to nothing higher than the first level. But I said, well, while I'm here, I'm going to start looking at a career after here. So I said, I'm going to start writing books, writing poetry and doing that. But I also said I'm going to do career fairs and talk to the youth and go from school to school and that type of thing to engage people in learning, get people, number one, to learn their history, number two, to learn about technology. So that's my whole life's quest, that's my passion, is to help our folks know and learn the true history, not just slavery, but their true history, Timbuktu and the whole nine. And also technology was a passion because I felt I didn't see, for 24 years, I never seen any other black person from Newark in AT&T, which killed me. It's really difficult when you're the only one. Matter of fact, one of my poems was the only one syndrome. When you're the only one in an environment of thousands of people, you get isolated, you just feel left out and alone. And it's very difficult for you to have the confidence to do your job because technology is about confidence. A lot of times you may not know what you're doing, but you got to have the confidence that you'll figure out what you're doing. Right. But you won't have that if you're not being supported by a network of people that believe in you. Right. And I had a network of people that didn't believe in black people at all. Matter of fact, I just thought of a name. When I was in Bell Labs, a guy, they brought a guy named Shockley. And this guy, white guy, technology guy, he actually came in Bell Labs and spoke to the whole Bell Labs and said, black people do not have the IQ of the race to be intelligent and to do these things. And that just wiped me out. That wiped me out. I was like, no they didn't. No they didn't bring a white man in here, or excuse me, a French, bring a man in here to say we don't have the IQ. Right. So I looked up the IQs and how that's calculated and refuted that whole notion, wrote a paper on it, but that wasn't enough. I said, okay, well, if they brought him in, well, I'm bringing in some people to show the flip side of this. Right. So I wanted to bring Dr. Ben, I couldn't get him. I brought in Dr. Jeffries, Dr. Gunther, Mr. Nobles from Channel 7. I brought in everyone I could to show the flip side of that, and had my Black History Club, which I was president of, the African American Club. And so that's what made me, the First World is what made me, and that's my passion, to share our history and to make sure that we understand ramifications of this technology revolution that's upon us. You know, so that's, I hate, sorry to go off on that. No, because when you started in what is now known technology, I had the good fortune of, I went through one of the little technical schools and I worked in what was then the computer field. I worked at Mutual Benefit, and it was the big mainframe and the cards and everything. And that's how old it was back in the 80s, you know? So I remember it,
but it was much different than it is now. Now
Yes.
you can send something, go
Yeah.
across the world.
Yeah, web,
here, oh goodness, if
internet,
those cards
yeah.
went in incorrectly,
Yeah.
you know, all the data was on it.
Yes.
So you came
That's how I
in
broke
back
in.
when, like you said, it was
Punch cards,
right.
IBM punch
It was
cards.
it was something so new.
Yeah.
People said you working with computers. Oh man, you must be smart because
Right.
it was just such a technology
Yeah.
then.
It was
And
tough.
I understand because there were very few. Mine wasn't as technical. Mine was just make sure the cards get through,
Right.
make sure you put the paper in there so that it
Right.
goes through and everything
Right.
like that. So it wasn't the technical layer, but it kept the company going.
Right.
And the worst part was when you printed checks. Because
Oh,
when
yeah,
you had
yes.
to line the checks
Right,
up,
right,
and
right.
you had to make sure, because if it started printing at the
Something-
wrong
yeah,
place,
something always could
yes,
go wrong.
yes. So I understand.